Welcome back to this Dark Reading Fast Chat series. Terry Sweeney here, contributing editor to Dark Reading, and I'm delighted to welcome Matt Radolec, Vice President of Incident Response and Cloud Operations with Varonis. Matt, thanks so much for joining us for the Dark Reading Fast Chat.
Yeah, I'm always browsing your website, and I'm happy to participate in one of your fast chats.
Excellent. Well, we're, of course, because it's security, we're talking AI, but we're also looking at some new generations of managed security services. But let's just start with some scene setting. Tell us a bit about some of the top security concerns that you're hearing about from the CISOs that you speak to. What are they looking for with things like deploying generative AI tools like Microsoft's Copilot?
Yeah, I think one of the kind of overwhelming things I hear a lot is, should we do this? Meaning that they haven't yet decided if their organization should adopt generative AI tools. And if they do, they're not necessarily even at that point of asking how to do it. What I generally find there is, most users haven't yet experienced what I call the magic, where whether it's for productivity's sake, like summarizing a meeting or a long email or searching something, or maybe even use the Copilot for security and use AI as a defender. If they're asking that question, they probably haven't seen some of the gains that you can get from it yet, but that comes up a lot. Another thing that comes up is the kind of the second school of people who's they're all in. They're like, this is great. I've experienced generative AI. I want to use it. I want to use Copilot. And they're asking the question like, what do I need to do beforehand? What do I need to do before I roll this out to all of my users? And there are some different risks with Copilot. There are some things that you need to keep in mind, especially as it relates to how access is set up in Copilot. It's very, very hard to undo access, Terry. So for instance, I know you and I are just chatting right now, and the scope of this is just you and me. But once you share it on your website, everyone that visits your website is probably going to be able to enjoy this conversation, right? And AI kind of works the same way. Once you share it out, it's very hard to unshare that information and expose it to people. And the way that Copilot works has what's called pass-through permissions. So if you already have access to it or you're given access to it, your Copilot has access to it as well. What I would probably say the third big concern from CISOs around these tools is, how are attackers going to use them against me?
Sure.
And I think this one is the one that probably causes the most fear and the most concern, but it's also the one that is not necessarily the most common. The reality is that people are facing the business choice of implementing one of these solutions. But in terms of attacks, yes, some attackers are starting to write better phishing emails. And if an attacker were to gain access to your Copilot, they could write some very good phishing emails. And that's some things that some security researchers have proved out already. But the real risk is, I think, not doing it or not embracing the fact that your business can gain from it and kind of taking advantage of the Copilot gains, as someone might say.
Well, rightly or wrongly, this underscores the Pandora's box nature of AI, at least for right now, deserved or undeserved. That being said, what are some things that CISOs and security professionals can do to address both these concerns and the risks that you highlighted?
Yeah, I think one of them is, and a lot of times like protecting information and restricting information to the right people. Sometimes people see it as like an impossible task, right? Like, I'm never, quote unquote, I'm never going to classify all my data. I'm never going to be able to label everything. And I think that the technology has come so far that these things are possible now. You can have an effective, inventory of where your sensitive information is. You can control the access to it using things like even with Microsoft's labeling, which is packaged into their security stack. Well, Varonis has a partnership with them on that. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that later. As well as other things, you can get to this effective least privilege access. You can use a lot of automation to get you there, so that when your users start to make queries and use prompts to get results back from something like a Copilot, they're not exposing corporate secrets or salary and personal data about employees, or other types of very confidential information that maybe someone didn't know were actually exposed. I think another one is doing general training for your users on how to use Copilot effectively, so that they understand and kind of focus their attention on the productivity gains and less on the experiment. I even think some of the basic stuff, like how to have Copilot summarize a meeting or attend a meeting for you, or how to have Copilot summarize an email thread, are great places to start.
Right. So many security processes are 24/7. This one sounds like one of those 24/7 kinds of requirements. Help us understand a little bit better why that's so.
Yeah, if you think of the average business as a retail store, you probably wouldn't understand why these types of things need to happen 24/7. But nowadays, even the chains of small retail stores are collaborating across different time zones or across different geographic boundaries. People are primarily using stuff like Office 365 and Teams to share data. And one of the big shifts that happened, and this happened a couple of years ago, we kind of talk about the shift to remote work, is people stopped working on content locally, and their machines themselves stopped being like warehouses of sensitive data, and they started only working with vaults, the Office 365s and the OneDrives and the Salesforces and a lot of cloud-based applications. As a result of that, IT lost a lot of control over who gets access to data. A lot of control got moved down to the end users, and that's something that's compounded with Gen AI. That's the real meat of the risk of something like a generative AI is, do my users have too much access to data, and is it going to be exposed too much to get them to use it? Or what we hope that people do is think about, well, what do I need to do before that so that I know that we're not going to get results back about proprietary or confidential information from every employee that uses a Copilot. And so when you think about like, well, why 24/7 then? Well, if you've got employees all around the world or in different time zones, you have offices in different places, people are going to be making queries and they're going to be using your Copilots. This is something now that security teams absolutely have to monitor. You have to look for people abusing this just as much as the business wants to look for people using it. But then you also have to look at, and do some of your own testing as well. And just like anything else, right? If you're looking for malware like ransomware, or you're looking for an attack at your front door, you're going to have the security there 24/7. You need to treat your data the same way. I often equivalent it to, everyone has a bank account, right? And in that bank, you expect that bank to hold a ledger. They know who, access money, withdrawals, debits and credits, all these things. But they also have some type of fraud detection. Everyone I talk to has gotten a call from their credit card company that said, hey, it looks like you're trying to buy a TV over here, but you're currently located over here. And organizations, they need to treat their data the same way, because Copilot is now the thing that's going to make those transactions, those deposits and withdrawals from your vaults to produce net new information. And it's super powerful. I always come back to the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. And that just undermines this whole conversation, is that there's so much power here, but there's a lot of responsibility for organizations to secure access to data so that the Copilots don't have access to too much.
All right. Well, with that in mind, Varonis has teamed up with Microsoft to secure Microsoft 365 Copilot. Walk us through some of the piece parts of that collaboration and just some of the scope and scale of it.
Sure. So, most organizations don't just have one SharePoint site and one SharePoint administrator. I think me personally, I'm in like maybe 100 different teams at Varonis. And those are just individual team sites. They're SharePoint sites on the back end. And when you think about trying to employ a person to manage each one of those links or each one of those sites, this is an impossible task. No one can keep up with the speed at which users are sharing and generating information. And this is what you need autonomy for. And so what Microsoft's looking to Varonis for is to bring our autonomous remediation. A lot of our intellectual property is actually in how we're able to look at data, see who's using it, and automatically restructure the access. We also provide that monitoring and fraud detection that I talked about. But this partnership with Microsoft is really around our ability to automatically, give you that right level of access to your data and apply things like the Microsoft sensitivity labels in order to keep that data safe. Because what will happen is, and I'm sure everyone, your listeners, has seen a TV show where the top of the document said top secret, that also exists electronically, and that's called a file label in the category of digital rights management. And you can take data that's labeled and have it fed to a Copilot, and the results that come out do not have those labels on them already. And so you now need to think about applying the labels to the newly generated content. And this is also something that Microsoft and Varonis have paired up together for, because we're able to see those files change or be created decided, watch the prompts be made, and very, very close to after when that happens, be able to put labels on those files.
Right. I don't know about you. I'm never as fast at stealing files from a desktop as those characters on TV.
Yeah. I have some skills. I have some skills.
Talk about, I'm sure you get these questions from customers and prospective customers all the time, but what advice do you have for organizations that are looking to roll out Copilot and other generative AI tools?
Yeah, first one is, focus on the business value at the start, because you want to have a good business case on why you're doing it. Understand the gains of your organization so that when, as a security pro, you're like, okay, we all understand that if we do this, productivity is going to go up 20%. This is just a guess here, Terry. So we need to do this for security in order to make that happen. And this, I actually think in a lot of ways, Copilot will be able to teach people how to navigate that balance between productivity and security, because everyone is here and we're saying the productivity gains are there, but it's up to security pros to say, hey, let's do this. But here's how we can do it securely. Here's how we can do it safely. Here's how we can make sure that no one is abusing it. We can watch after it 24/7. Like, this is a great time for security in the business to come together and be a force multiplier for productivity. And then there's benefits for security too. We're using AI in our products. Microsoft also has a Copilot for security. So there's AI to be used for the defenders, much like AI to be used for the general productivity.
Right. Varonis also recently launched a managed data detection and response service. Take us out with a bit of substance about what's included there and what the service is all about.
Sure. Everyone always, I think, CISOs, business leaders, they ask this question, is my data safe? And I think it's really hard for people on average to answer that. And we found that our clients were buying our software and working with teams like the incident response team periodically to ask that question. Well, a few years after doing that, they're like, hey, can't you just answer this for us all the time? Can't you tell us 24/7, 365, is my data safe, and escalate to us when maybe you think my data is not safe? And that's really what, managed data detection and response was born out of. And also because when you look at the managed security services market, there are a lot of people that can tell you that you have a malware infection, but there are not a lot of people that can tell you that your data was exfiltrated or is actively being accessed by a cyber actor or an insider threat. And this is just a huge gap in people's security stacks. As soon as they start to, instead of thinking outside in, I always think of a castle, right? I'm going to build a moat and I'm going to build a wall and I'm going to have archers on top of the wall. What if that threat is already in the room with the vault? Are you going to watch who comes in and out of that vault where those treasures are? And that's what people ultimately are doing with managed data detection response. They're thinking about their security program as that vault and working their way out, and not as, I'm going to make sure I have archers in a tower at my fence line. I mean, those things are good too, but attackers have figured out how to get in and impersonate real people, or the attacker is already one of your employees, and that makes this even harder.
Well, bravo, Matt. You've got me thinking differently about both generative AI and managed services for security. Thanks for doing this Fat Chat today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, same to you, Terry. I hope we get to do this again sometime.
Thank you. We've been talking with Matt Radolec, VP of Incident Response and Cloud Operations with Varonis. This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading Fast Chat series. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.